just what he meant to Japan, but also just worldwide. That a guy kind of like we talk about Shohei Ohtani, that just everybody maybe up there with Ali or Pele. I mean, it seems like everybody's heard of Ohtani certainly, and then also Ichiro.
Yes, no, you're right, and it was interesting yesterday. A very poignant message I received from my colleague Daisuke Sugiura, who's a member of the Japanese media based in New York. And he sort of tied in exactly what you're describing, Dave, that yes, right now we've got Ohtani and what a big story he is. But if we did not have Ichiro, we would not have Ohtani. Because to your point, yes, there's the social credibility that Ichiro brought, as in seeing a member of the Japanese baseball community become this superstar and rock star in North America. It did lift the spirits of a lot of Japanese fans and the Japanese public. But what it also did was transform the idea of what American baseball people thought that Japanese players could do on a daily basis in Major League Baseball. There was this very incorrect belief that some would offer at the time. And again, this is only a quarter century ago, because at that point in time, think about this. As of a quarter century ago, we had never seen a Japanese player come over and have success as an everyday position player. We had seen Nomo, and Irabu had had his time briefly. This is right around the time, of course, Kazusaki came over as a closer for the Mariners. But they were all there before Ichiro. So we had said, pitching can work. But we weren't sure about the position player in the everyday. And then Ichiro comes up in 2001 and wins the Rookie of the Year and the MVP in the same year. And we said, I guess it does work. Okay, great. So he changed the perception. And so that, to me, I always love when you talk about sports. And certainly I lived it in Detroit, where for a long time people would say, the Red Wings had too many European players to win the Stanley Cup. It was such a bizarre and incorrect and jingoistic way of looking at things that was said. And of course, the Wings proved them wrong. And Ichiro proved the other people wrong that were questioning whether or not it would work. And I think that was something I found to be it's a very compelling part of his story. And that's why you see players, whether it's Jung-Hoo Lee with the Giants, who grew up even as a Korean player, wearing 51, wanting to be like Ichiro. Seiya Suzuki, wanting to wear 51. And, of course, now we get the news yesterday about 51 being retired for all time by the Mariners. And it is every step forward. And in speaking with members of the Japanese media yesterday, you just get a sense of the gravity of what this means. And Brad Lefton is a dear friend of mine, has worked for a long time with NHK and knows Ichiro very well. Brad said that yesterday is in a lot of ways an affirmation of the arrival and the progress of Japanese baseball as an institution over 150 years. Now, think about that. 150 years ago was around the time that baseball was introduced to Japan. Been a lot of world history that's happened in the last 150 years. And for them to consider this as one of those points that you will hear about, not just on the sports pages of Tokyo today, but indeed in history textbooks in Japanese classes for a long time, that one of our own is now the first ever Japanese-born person to be elected into the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. It is just a massive deal. The reason why, when I was in Cooperstown today, the majority of media credentials issued for the press conference tomorrow were issued to Japanese media members, even though an immensely popular New York Yankee will be there. So just think about that. New York's about 3 hours away from Cooperstown. Tokyo to Cooperstown is a little bit of a more difficult journey, okay? And yet the majority of the media credentials are issued to Japanese media. That just tells you everything about what Ichiro means in the Japanese consciousness and what a transformative moment this is. You're right, for the country, for the culture of Japanese baseball. And whenever you turn on the TV and see all these Japanese superstars in baseball now, obviously like half the Dodgers roster, Imanaga and Suzuki with the Cubs and the Red Sox, of course. There's a lot of different Japanese stars all around baseball. really, it's all possible because of the success initially of Nomo on the mound, but I think much more enduringly by what Ichiro's been able to do.
Jon Morosi joining us on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. It's Wyman and Bob. Hey, John, you saw Billy Wagner go in, and he goes in with a vote total of 82.5%. The reason I'm bringing him up is because it was his 10th and final year on the ballot. His first year on the ballot, he got 10.5% of the vote. So here he is in the final year, 82.5, a tremendous jump. Does that bode well for Felix Hernandez, who his first year, here he is with a 20.6% of the vote?
It really does. And again, my colleague Joel Sherman, I credit Joel with a lot of his wonderful insights that I get to enjoy sitting beside him on the set for us here. In Joel's theory, I think there's a lot to it, is that we're about to go through a time where we reevaluate what it means to be a Hall of Fame starting pitcher, because we're entering this era now where careers are not as long, and guys do not throw as much innings. As a consequence, they don't win as many games. Verlander might get to 300 wins, and now we're talking about 200 as being the landmark that very few guys will ever get to. So as the thresholds start to move a little bit lower, Felix's peak looks all the more impressive. And if we're going to move away from a time where we emphasize the compilation of numbers in the way that a Burt Blyleven did, or a Don Sutton did, or someone I think Tommy John should be in there. He's not, but I think he should be. The notion of compiling is almost out, because we're just not going to have guys that compile at that level. Mark Burley did, and he's starting to finally get some momentum on the ballot. I think Andy Pettit's going to get more and more momentum because of exactly what we're talking about. There's just a dearth of the classic 3,000 strikeout, massive high innings total kinds of guys. And so that's all going to help Felix. I'll be honest. So I did not vote for him this time around because I really felt as though he would be able to debut on the ballot and stay and get above 5%, which fortunately he did. And so I voted, and I supported McCann and Kinsler in an effort to get them to stay around for a second year, but they fell short. And so now I've got spaces on my ballot to allocate, and I expect that Felix and Pettit will probably be on my ballot a year from now, because there's room. There's not as many of these classic cases of ace pitchers like CeCe that we're going to have coming on the ballot. Really, there's none. It's Cole Hamels is the top starter coming on next, and I think Felix is a much stronger case than Hamels. And Felix is his peak, and that's kind of what we're heading towards now. The peak of Felix was so dominant and so great that he's going to start looking better and better. And the other really interesting thing that I'm sure we're going to get into on future ballots, how do you rate the extreme effectiveness of a Billy Wagner, best Ks per nine for anybody with 900 innings in the live ball era, effectively? So how do you compare Felix's career to Wagner's career? Wagner obviously has a lower ERA because he's a reliever,
right,
but Felix threw considerably more innings. So at some point, do you say, well, you love Wagner's career and he's in with 900 innings, and so what's the sliding scale there? How many innings must a starter pitch while being relatively comparable in ERA? Again, not at the same level, but somewhat in the same range. What's the bare minimum? And what does that mean for Felix and Johan Santana, who I think has a legitimate case of his own? So we're entering this inflection point, and it's honestly refreshing, because less and less of our conversation now is about steroids, and more of it is about how the game has changed. I mean, steroids have not totally gone away from the conversation. A-Rod's still on the ballot, as is Manny, but we're moving more towards a time where voters like me and Jason Stark and Joel, who were up there talking about our decisions all week, we're thinking more about how the game is changing and what it means for our prism through which we're viewing the candidates versus the ethical dilemma of steroids.